Emma was not someone people noticed easily. Every morning, she arrived at the cafe just before sunrise, tying her dark hair into a neat bun and slipping on her simple white apron. Her shoes were worn out, her hands always smelled faintly of coffee and dish soap, and yet, she carried a quiet grace, the kind that came from patience. The cafe was her world. The hum of conversation, the clinking of cups, the hiss of the coffee machine. It was the rhythm of her days. She had been working there for almost 3 years. Most of the customers didn't even know her name. To them, she was just the waitress. She smiled when they called out orders, nodded politely when they snapped their fingers for refills, and kept her voice soft and polite, even when she was tired. Emma never complained. She didn't have anyone to complain to anyway. Her small apartment was only a few blocks away, and when she went home, the silence was heavy, broken only by the distant sounds of traffic and the ticking of the clock on the wall. But what no one knew was that Emma wasn't always a waitress. When she was younger, she had dreamed of being a pianist. Her father had taught her how to play. He wasn't a professional, just a man who loved music and believed that his daughter had a special gift. They used to spend hours at the old upright piano in their living room, playing duets and laughing when they hit the wrong notes. Those were the happiest days of her life. But when her father passed away suddenly, everything changed. The piano sat silent after that. The house felt empty, and Emma stopped playing altogether. Life pushed her forward. Bills needed paying. Survival became more important than dreams. And so she found herself at the cafe, trading melodies for menus. Every day followed the same routine. She'd arrive before the morning rush, clean the tables, and line up sugar jars and cups in perfect seat order. Her manager, Mr. Cooper, was strict but fair. He liked her because she never caused trouble. Some of the other staff made jokes about how quiet she was, calling her the ghost waitress because she moved so silently between tables. Emma would just smile shyly, never defending herself. She had learned that silence was safer than standing out. Still, there was something different about her. When the cafe was nearly empty in the afternoon, she would sometimes hum softly while wiping the tables. Gentle, slow tunes that no one recognized. Sometimes, if she was alone, she would glance at the old piano in the corner of the cafe. It was mostly used as decoration now. Dust gathered on its keys, and no one had played it in years. But whenever Emma's eyes met that piano, something in her chest stirred, like a memory waking up from sleep. On busy evenings, the cafe often turned lively. Businessmen, students, and local artists filled the space with laughter and chatter. The regular customers were friendly, but never really paid attention to Emma. They didn't notice how her eyes sparkled when the music from the speakers played softly in the background, or how her fingers sometimes tapped invisible keys on her apron while she waited for an order to be ready. Music still lived inside her, but it had no voice, not anymore. One cold Thursday afternoon, as she was cleaning the counter, an old man entered the cafe carrying a violin case. He ordered coffee and sat near the piano. He asked the manager if he could play a few tunes for the customers. Mr. Cooper agreed, and soon the cafe filled with warm, sweet melodies. The man's fingers danced gracefully on the strings, and people smiled, some even clapping along. Emma stood behind the counter, watching with quiet admiration. It reminded her of her father, and the sound of the piano they once shared. For a moment, her heart exhaled. She looked down quickly, pretending to focus on polishing a cup, but her hands were trembling slightly. When the music stopped, the customers applauded. The violinist smiled kindly and looked around, his eyes resting briefly on Emma. "You have a piano there," he said to the manager. "Does anyone play it anymore?" Mr. Cooper laughed. "No one. It's just for decoration now." The violinist nodded and packed up his instrument, but Emma kept thinking about his words. That night, as she closed up the cafe, she walked over to the piano and gently lifted the cover. Dust floated in the air like tiny ghosts. She pressed one key, just one, and the note echoed softly in the quiet room. It was slightly out of tune, but it carried a strange kind of beauty. Emma smiled, just a little, before locking up and heading home. Her apartment was small. One room tiny kitchen, and a window that faced a busy street. In the corner stood her old keyboard, covered with a thin sheet. She hadn't touched it in years. That night, something inside her changed. Maybe it was the sound of the violin earlier, or maybe it was the lonely hum of the city, but she walked over, pulled off the sheet, and sat down. Her fingers hesitated at first, unsure, but then a soft melody filled the air. It was shaky, imperfect, but it was hers. She closed her eyes, letting the music flow. For the first time in a long while, Emma didn't feel like a waitress. She felt like herself again. Outside, the city lights flickered, and the moonlight fell gently across her face. Emma didn't know what the future held, but that night, something deep inside her whispered that her story wasn't over yet. Somewhere between the sound of the piano keys and the quiet of her little room, she found a piece of the girl she used to be, the one who still believed in music. The cafe was unusually busy that Friday evening. The smell of roasted coffee beans mixed with the sweetness of pastries and the sound of laughter. A local band was supposed to perform, and the regular customers were excited. Emma moved quickly between tables, balancing trays and taking orders, her apron already dotted with tiny stains from spilled drinks. She loved these nights, even though they were exhausting. The music always lifted the mood, and for a few hours, the cafe felt like a warm, breathing world full of energy. But that night, something went wrong. The band's pianist hadn't shown up. A few minutes before their set, the band's leader approached the manager, frowning. "Our pianist got stuck in traffic," he said. "We might have to cancel." Mr. Cooper, the manager, sighed. "Cancel? Not tonight. The place is packed. People came for music, not silence." He looked around helplessly, tapping his pen on the counter. That's when one of the waiters, Tom, chuckled and pointed toward Emma. "Why not let Emma play? She's always humming something under her breath." A ripple of laughter spread among the staff. Even the band members smiled politely, thinking it was a joke. Emma froze in the middle of the floor, holding a tray with 2 cups of cappuccino. "Me?" she said quietly, her voice barely rising above the chatter. "Yeah," Tom teased. "You always look like you're hearing some secret tune. Come on, show us what you've got." Emma's cheeks burned. The customers nearest the counter turned to look at her with amused faces. Mr. Cooper shook his head, still laughing. "She's a waitress, not a performer," he said. "Let's not make a scene." The laughter stung, even though she tried to pretend it didn't. Emma smiled politely, placed the cups down on a nearby table, and hurried back to the counter. Her hands trembled as she wiped them on her apron. She wasn't angry, just embarrassed. It wasn't the first time someone had made fun of her quiet nature. People always assumed that silence meant weakness, that being gentle meant being small. The band decided to perform without a pianist. The music was fine, but it felt incomplete. The missing notes hung in the air like unfinished thoughts. As Emma cleared tables near the stage, she found herself unconsciously tapping the rhythm of the song with her fingers on the edge of a plate. A customer noticed and smiled. "You look like you want to play," he said kindly. Emma just smiled shyly. "I used to," she replied softly. "A long time ago." When the set ended, the cafe filled with applause. The band members thanked the audience and packed their instruments. The crowd started thinning out. But among the laughter and chatter, Emma could still hear the echo of Tom's teasing voice. "Come on, show us what you've got." That night, as she cleaned the empty tables, the moment replayed in her mind again and again. She told herself it didn't matter, that she didn't care. But deep inside she felt something stirring, something between pain and defiance. Why did it bother her so much? Maybe because they laughed at the part of her she had buried, the part that once dreamed of playing in front of people. When the cafe finally closed, Emma stayed a little longer than usual. The lights were dim and the city outside was quiet. She walked toward the piano in the corner. It sat there like a forgotten relic, its wooden surface dull and dusty. She hesitated, glancing toward the door to make sure no one was watching. Then, with trembling hands, she lifted the cover and pressed one key. A soft note filled the air, faint but beautiful. It made her heart race. She pressed another, then another. The sound was imperfect, but it carried a warmth that wrapped around her like an old memory. For a moment she imagined her father standing behind her, nodding with that same proud smile he used to have. But then the cafe door creaked open and Emma jumped back, quickly closing the piano. It was Tom, again, coming to grab his forgotten jacket. "What are you doing?" he asked, a teasing grin on his face. "Nothing," Emma replied quickly, stepping away. He smirked. "Practicing for your big debut?" He laughed and walked out without waiting for a response. Emma stood there in silence, her cheeks hot with embarrassment again. But this time, she didn't feel small. She felt something else, something sharp and alive. She wasn't angry at Tom. She was angry at herself for letting fear keep her quiet. On her way home, she walked past a street performer playing a small electric keyboard under a flickering streetlight. People threw coins into a hat, some stopping to listen, others walking past without a glance. The man's music was simple, raw, and full of emotion. Emma stopped and listened for a moment, her eyes misting. When he finished, she dropped a few coins into his hat and whispered, "That was beautiful." The man looked up and smiled. "Music always finds its way back," he said softly. Those words followed her home. She repeated them in her mind as she unlocked her apartment door. Music always finds its way back. That night, Emma sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her old keyboard in the corner. She reached over, plugged it in, and placed her fingers gently on the keys. The first notes were awkward, rusty, but soon her hands remembered what her heart had never forgotten. The melody was soft, something between sadness and hope. As she played, she could almost hear the echo of laughter fading behind her, replaced by something stronger, her own courage. For the first time in years, Emma didn't feel invisible. The same people who laughed might never understand what music meant to her, but that didn't matter. Somewhere deep inside, she knew that the next time someone asked her to play, she wouldn't hide. She'd be ready. That night, sleep didn't come easily to Emma. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her small room bathed in the pale light of the street lamp outside. The laughter from the cafe still echoed in her mind. Those careless chuckles, the teasing words, the looks that made her feel small. She turned on her side, clutching her pillow tightly. It wasn't the first time people had underestimated her, but this time, something inside her refused to stay quiet. For years, Emma had told herself that her dreams were childish. Life had hardened her, turned her from a girl who once played music with passion into a woman who carried trays and wiped tables. She had convinced herself that dreams were for people who had time and money, not for someone struggling to pay rent. But that night, something began to shift. It wasn't anger that filled her, but a deep, quiet determination. She realized she was tired of letting fear decide what she could or couldn't do. The next morning, she woke up before sunrise. The sky was still dark, and the air outside her window was cool and fresh. She made herself a cup of instant coffee and sat by her old keyboard. It looked worn, a few keys slightly discolored, dust clinging to the corners. Emma stared at it for a long time before she finally touched it again. When she pressed the first key, the sound was faint and imperfect. Her fingers were stiff, unused to the motion, but as she continued, something began to awaken, not just in her hands, but in her heart. The melody that emerged was slow and uncertain, but it carried emotion, the kind that came from years of silence. It was as if every unsaid word, every hidden tear, every long night of loneliness was being translated into music. Emma played until the sun began to rise, filling the room with warm, golden light. For the first time in years, she smiled, not because she was happy, but because she felt alive again. There was still pain, still fear, but beneath it all was hope, faint yet steady. At the cafe that day, everything seemed the same. The chatter, the smell of coffee, the clinking of cups. But Emma was different. Her movements were lighter, her smile a little braver. The other waiters didn't notice at first. Tom cracked a few more jokes, and she simply nodded, not letting it get to her this time. Inside, She had made a promise to herself. The next time she had a chance to play, she wouldn't hesitate. In the quiet moments between customers, she found herself glancing at the piano again. It stood near the corner, polished but untouched. Most people didn't even notice it anymore, but to Emma, it felt like a silent friend waiting patiently for her to return. That evening, after the rush died down, she approached Mr. Cooper. "Sir," she began softly, "about the piano. Do you ever think we could use it again? Maybe for the customers?" The manager raised an eyebrow. "That old thing? It's more decoration than instrument now. Why?" Emma hesitated, unsure if she should reveal her secret. "It's just... it might be nice. Music always brings people together." He shrugged. "Maybe. But unless someone knows how to play, it'll just gather more dust." She smiled faintly. "Maybe someone does," she whispered, turning away before he could respond. That night, after closing, Emma stayed behind again. The cafe was empty, the air still and quiet. She walked over to the piano, brushed her fingers along its wooden frame, and sat down. Her reflection glimmered faintly on the polished surface. She took a deep breath and began to play, softly at first, so the notes wouldn't echo outside. It wasn't perfect. The keys were stiff and a few notes were slightly out of tune, but the sound was real, warm and honest. It was the first time she had played a real piano since her father passed away. As her fingers moved, memories rushed back. His laughter, his patient voice, the way he used to tap his foot along with her rhythm. Tears blurred her vision, but she didn't stop. Halfway through the song, she noticed someone standing in the doorway. It was Sarah, one of the new waitresses. She had come back for her phone. "Emma," she said softly, "that's beautiful." Emma froze, her heart racing. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean..." "No," Sarah interrupted, smiling. "Don't apologize. You should play for everyone." Emma looked down at the keys. Her instinct was to deny it, to hide, to say she wasn't good enough. But this time she didn't. She just nodded slightly and whispered, "Maybe someday." When she finally left the cafe, the night sky was filled with stars. She walked home with a lightness in her steps that she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong anymore. It wasn't about the laughter or the teasing. It was about finding herself again. The girl who loved music, the woman who refused to let that love die. From that day on, Emma practiced every morning before work and every night before bed. She didn't care if no one believed in her yet. She had started believing in herself, and that, she realized, was enough. Because sometimes the loudest strength isn't in shouting back, it's in quietly deciding, "I'm not done yet." The following week began like any other. Long hours, tired smiles, and the comforting chaos of the cafe. Emma had settled back into her rhythm, moving gracefully between tables, but inside her, something had changed. She felt awake again. Every night she practiced the piano in secret, her fingertips slowly regaining the confidence they once had. The music was no longer just sound. It was her way of breathing, of remembering who she was. Friday arrived with the usual crowd. The cafe buzzed with conversation and laughter. Outside, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky in streaks of gold and pink. Emma worked quietly, as she always did, carrying trays and exchanging polite smiles. The live band was scheduled to play again that evening, and the place was already packed with people waiting for the show to begin. But as the clock struck 7, the cafe's phone rang. Mr. Cooper answered, his expression quickly shifting from calm to annoyed. "What do you mean you can't make it?" he said into the receiver. After a pause, he sighed and rubbed his forehead. "Fine. We'll figure something out." He hung up, muttering under his breath. The pianist from the band had canceled. Again. The musicians looked helpless. "We can't perform without him," said the guitarist. "He's the one who leads half our songs." Mr. Cooper frowned. We've got a full house tonight. I can't tell these people the music's canceled again. He looked around the room, his eyes scanning for a solution that didn't exist. And then, his gaze stopped on Emma. For a moment, he hesitated. Emma, he said, crossing his arms. You still mess around with the piano, don't you? The question caught her off guard. I practice sometimes, she admitted quietly. Sometimes? Tom, the waiter, snorted from behind the counter. Last time you played, I think the windows almost cracked. A few chuckles followed. Emma's face flushed, but she didn't look away this time. Mr. Cooper shrugged. Well, you can either prove him wrong or we tell everyone to go home. What do you say? The cafe seemed to grow quieter, though the noise hadn't really stopped. Emma's heart pounded in her chest. Her hands felt cold, and for a second she wanted to disappear, to say no, to walk away and pretend she hadn't heard. But something stronger held her still. She remembered her promise to herself, the hours of practice, the soft echo of her father's encouragement in her memory. She nodded. I'll play. The words surprised even her. The laughter around her faded. Mr. Cooper blinked, then gave a small, approving nod. All right then, don't make me regret it. As she walked toward the piano, the world felt distant, muffled, like she was underwater. Her hands trembled as she slid the stool back and sat down. The wooden surface felt cool beneath her fingers. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside her chest. From behind the counter, Tom whispered, This should be interesting. Someone chuckled quietly. Emma heard it, but for once she didn't let it touch her. She stared at the piano keys, their ivory surfaces glowing softly under the warm cafe lights. The room buzzed with quiet curiosity now. Even the customers turned their heads, murmuring among themselves. A waitress playing the piano? It sounded like a joke, but there was something in her expression that made a few people pause. She placed her fingers on the keys. For a moment she didn't move. Her heart beat faster with every passing second. Then she closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and pressed down the first note. It rang out softly, a single trembling sound that cut through the noise of clinking glasses and faint chatter. Then came another and another, until the melody began to form. The cafe grew still, as though the air itself was holding its breath. The sound was raw but beautiful. Each note carried emotion, flowing from her fingertips like a story only she could tell. Her body relaxed as the music took over. She wasn't Emma the waitress anymore. She was Emma the pianist, the dreamer, the believer, the girl who had waited too long to let her voice be heard. The customers leaned closer, drawn by the sincerity in her playing. The mocking expression softened. A few people even stopped mid-sentence, cups frozen halfway to their lips. The music filled every corner of the cafe, tender yet powerful. As she played, memories flooded her mind. Her father's laughter, her first recital, the night she promised herself she'd never play again. But instead of breaking her, they gave her strength. The pain melted into passion, and the fear turned into something beautiful. Courage. When the last note faded, there was silence. A silence so deep it almost felt like another song, a song of realization. The people who had laughed now sat frozen, eyes wide. Even Tom stood behind the counter, speechless. Then slowly someone began to clap. Another joined. Within seconds, the entire cafe was applauding, some even cheering. The sound of their hands filled the room, echoing off the walls, wrapping around Emma like a warm embrace. She looked up, her eyes glistening. For a second, she couldn't speak. Then she smiled. A real, unguarded smile, one she hadn't worn in years. Mr. Cooper approached her, still clapping softly. "You've been hiding that from us," he said with a small grin. "I think we just found ourselves a new Friday night tradition." Emma laughed quietly, her voice trembling. "Maybe," she said, "if you'll let me." As she stood up from the piano, the customers continued clapping. The same people who once saw her as invisible now looked at her with admiration. For the first time, Emma felt seen, truly seen. And somewhere, deep inside, she knew that this was only the beginning. When the last note faded into the air, it was as if the entire cafe forgot how to move. The sound lingered like a soft whisper, and then, nothing. Just stillness. Not a single cup clinked, no chair scraped against the floor, and even the faint buzz of the coffee machine seemed to quiet down. Emma sat there with her hands still resting on the piano keys, her chest rising and falling as she caught her breath. Her fingers trembled slightly, and a tear she hadn't realized she'd been holding finally slipped down her cheek. It wasn't from sadness, but from something much deeper. Relief, joy, disbelief. In that frozen moment, she wasn't a waitress anymore. She wasn't the girl people overlooked, the one who hid behind trays and polite smiles. She was a musician, a woman who had finally spoken the language she'd been carrying inside her heart all along. Then, slowly, the silence broke. Someone near the back clapped once. The sound was small at first, then another joined, and then another, until the entire cafe erupted in applause. The wave of sound filled the room, rolling forward like a rising tide. People stood, clapping and cheering, their faces glowing with emotion. Some smiled widely, others wiped away tears. Emma blinked, stunned. She looked around, her vision slightly blurry, trying to process what was happening. For years she had dreamed of this moment, though she never thought it would come like this. In her cafe uniform, with flour stains on her apron and tired eyes from a long shift. But maybe that was what made it real. Mr. Cooper, the manager, was clapping too, his usually stern expression replaced by something softer. Pride, admiration, and maybe even surprise. "You did it," he said quietly when the applause began to fade. "You really did it." Emma stood up, her knees weak, her heart racing with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered, but her voice was lost in the sound of the crowd. A few people rushed to her, asking if she had an online page or where they could hear her music again. Someone shouted, "Play another one!" And laughter followed. She smiled shyly, shaking her head. "Maybe another time," she said, her voice trembling with warmth. Tom, the waiter who had teased her so often, approached her hesitantly. His usual grin was gone, replaced by genuine awe. "Emma," he said, scratching the back of his neck awkwardly. I didn't know you could play like that." Emma looked at him and smiled, not unkindly. "That's all right," she said softly. "You weren't supposed to." He nodded, his face turning a little red. "Guess I should stop underestimating people, huh?" "Maybe," she replied, her smile widening just a little. As the customers slowly began to leave, some stopped by the counter to thank her. A woman in a red scarf took her hand gently and said, "You have a gift, dear. Don't ever hide it again." Her eyes glistened with sincerity. Emma's throat tightened as she managed a quiet, "Thank you." When the cafe finally emptied, the once lively room felt peaceful. Not silent in an empty way, but full in a calm, glowing way, like the air still carried the warmth of her music. The piano sat there, its keys faintly illuminated by the soft lights, no longer just a forgotten decoration. Mr. Cooper handed her a clean towel. "Take a few minutes before you clean up," he said. "You've done enough tonight." Emma laughed gently, her voice trembling. "Thank you, sir." He nodded, smiling. "And Emma?" "Yes?" "Next Friday," he said. "I expect you to play again. The customers are already asking." Her heart skipped. "Really?" "Really," he replied. "Looks like we've got ourselves a resident pianist." She bit her lip to keep from crying again, and nodded. "I'd like that." When everyone was gone, Emma stayed behind for a little while. She sat once more at the piano, tracing her fingers across the cool, worn keys. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the polished surface. She thought about her father, how he'd always told her that one day she'd play for people who truly listened. "I did it, Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I finally did it." Outside, the rain had started. Light, steady, rhythmic, almost like applause from the sky. She listened to it for a moment, smiling through her tears. Then she began to play again. Softly, just for herself this time. No audience, no laughter, no fear. Only her, the piano, and the music that had been waiting inside her all along. The sound filled the empty cafe, gentle and beautiful, mixing with the rain outside. And as the notes drifted into the night, Emma realized something she hadn't before. This moment, this silence after the storm of applause, was where she truly belonged. It wasn't the clapping or the praise that made her feel alive. It was the music itself. The pure, honest joy of finally being heard. The cafe was alive that evening. Laughter bouncing off the walls, coffee machines hissing, chairs scraping against the floor as people found their seats. Yet in the corner of the room, by the old wooden piano, everything was still. Emma sat there, her hands trembling slightly above the keys, her heart beating so loudly it almost drowned out the chatter around her. She could feel everyone's eyes on her. The regular customers, the waiters, even Mr. Cooper standing near the counter with crossed arms. The same people who had once laughed at the idea of the waitress playing the piano were now waiting to see if she would embarrass herself or surprise them. Emma took a slow, deep breath. The scent of roasted coffee beans filled her lungs, grounding her in the moment. She closed her eyes for a second, blocking out the faces, the whispers, the noise, everything but the piano in front of her. Her fingers hovered above the keys, unsure where to begin. For a brief moment, fear tried to take over again. Her mind flashed with old memories. The night her father first taught her a song, his warm laughter echoing through their small living room. She remembered how his hands had guided hers gently across the keys, how he'd said, "Music isn't about being perfect, Emma. It's about being honest." She opened her eyes. That memory steadied her. And then, she pressed the first key. A soft, delicate note broke through the air, quiet but pure. The laughter in the cafe faded. The next note followed, and then another, forming the start of a gentle melody. The crowd grew silent. Forks stopped clinking. Conversations died mid-sentence. The music was slow at first, hesitant, like a fragile secret being spoken aloud for the first time. But soon it began to grow. The melody deepened, becoming warm and full, the kind of sound that wrapped around the heart and pulled at old emotions people didn't know they still had. Emma forgot where she was. She wasn't in the cafe anymore. She was back in her father's living room, sunlight spilling across the keys, his proud smile glowing beside her. Every note was a memory, every chord a heartbeat. Her body swayed slightly with the rhythm as her fingers found their flow, moving faster, more confidently with each passing second. The customers watched in awe. Some exchanged glances, whispering, "I didn't know she could play like that." Others simply stared, captivated. The same piano that had gathered dust for years now sang under Emma's touch, filling the cafe with a kind of magic no one expected to hear that night. Tom, who had once teased her, stood frozen near the espresso machine. He didn't laugh this time. He didn't even blink. The melody shifted, rising in intensity. Soft and graceful at first, then powerful, emotional, as though her soul itself was flowing through the keys. Each note told a story of pain, loss, love, and quiet resilience. People could feel it, not just hear it. One older woman sitting near the window dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. A couple at the corner table reached across to hold hands. Even Mr. Cooper, the no-nonsense manager who never smiled for long, found himself watching with quiet pride. For Emma, the world outside the music no longer existed. She felt her heart sink with the rhythm. She wasn't just playing. She was speaking through the piano, saying everything she never could in words, Every tear she had swallowed, every quiet night of doubt, every moment of loneliness, all of it melted into the melody. When she reached the final part of the song, her movement slowed. The last few notes were soft, almost like whispers fading into the night. Her hands lingered on the keys as the final sound echoed through the cafe. And then, silence. A deep, breathless silence filled the room. For a moment, no one moved. It was as if the entire cafe had forgotten how to breathe. The only sound was the faint hum of the coffee machine in the background. Emma sat still, her hands resting gently on the piano, her chest rising and falling as she tried to calm her racing heart. Then came a single clap, hesitant, almost shy. Another joined, and then another. Within seconds, the room erupted into applause. People stood from their seats, clapping, cheering, some even whistling. The sound filled the cafe like a wave. Emma blinked in disbelief, her vision blurring slightly as tears welled up in her eyes. She smiled, her cheeks flushed pink, her heart overflowing. For a moment, she didn't know what to do. She had never been applauded like this before. Mr. Cooper approached from behind the counter, smiling proudly. "Well, Miss Emma," he said loud enough for others to hear, "you've just stole the show." The crowd cheered louder. Emma stood slowly, her knees still shaky. She gave a small bow, her smile trembling with emotion. The applause, she continued, and someone shouted, "Encore!" making the room erupt in laughter and joy. In that moment, she wasn't the shy, quiet waitress anymore. She was Emma, the pianist who had made an entire room forget their coffee, their worries, their conversations, even if only for a few minutes. As the noise settled and people returned to their seats, Emma sat down again, placing her hands gently on the keys. She took one last deep breath and began a softer tune, one that spoke of gratitude, of rediscovery, of courage reborn. The music filled the cafe once more, and this time, the whole room listened, not just with their ears, but with their hearts. And for the first time in years, Emma felt what she had been missing all along, not just happiness, but belonging. As the last echoes of her song faded into the warm air of the cafe, Emma sat still, her hands resting on the keys. Her heart raced, not from fear this time, but from something deeper, a feeling she hadn't known in years. The cafe, once filled with noise and chatter, was now silent in awe. And then, just like a wave, the sound of clapping returned, louder and stronger than before. It wasn't polite applause. It was real, emotional, from the heart. Some people stood up, others wiped their eyes. Even those who had come just for a quick cup of coffee now found themselves moved in ways they couldn't explain. Emma looked around, almost in disbelief. The same faces that once looked past her, now looked up at her, their expressions soft, full of wonder. She had worked here for years, and never had she felt this kind of attention, this kind of respect. It was strange, but beautiful. She stood slowly, her knees trembling a little. Mr. Cooper, the manager, was clapping too, a proud smile tugging at the corners of his usually serious face. "Emma," he said, shaking his head, "you've been hiding a whole concert in your fingers. All this time?" The crowd laughed warmly. Emma blushed, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I just used to play," she said quietly. "Used to?" Mr. Cooper said with a chuckle. "Not anymore, you don't?" The customers applauded again, cheering, some even calling out for her to play another. Emma hesitated at first. Part of her was afraid that the magic would vanish if she tried again. But then she saw the smiles, the glowing faces, the people holding up their phones to record her. And she realized that this was her moment. She sat down once more, taking a deep breath. This time, when she played, it wasn't just with skill, it was with confidence. The melody danced through the air, playful and bright, full of joy and light. The cafe seemed to come alive with her music. The golden lights reflected off the glass windows. The soft hum of the espresso machine blended with the rhythm, and for a few precious minutes, everything, every sound, every heartbeat, was in harmony. When she finished, the room exploded into applause again, louder than before. Some people cheered, others stood on their feet. Tom, the waiter who had teased her so often, stood frozen near the counter, a small smile forming on his face. When Emma caught his eye, he looked down, embarrassed but sincere. "That was amazing," he said quietly when she walked past him later. She smiled. "Thanks, Tom." Something inside her had shifted. Something small but powerful. For years, she had carried her music like a secret, hidden away where no one could see it. But now, the world had heard it, and that changed everything. She wasn't just the quiet waitress anymore. She was Emma, a pianist, an artist, someone who had found her voice again. After closing that night, the cafe was calm. The chairs were stacked, the lights dimmed, and the smell of coffee lingered in the air. Emma stayed behind, cleaning the last few tables, still feeling the warmth of the applause in her chest. Mr. Cooper came over and leaned against the counter. "You know," he said, "I think we should make this a regular thing. Every Friday, Emma on the piano. What do you say?" Emma's eyes widened. "Me? But..." "No buts," he interrupted kindly. "You made this place come alive tonight. People were smiling, recording videos, even asking if we had a schedule for you. You've got something special, Emma. Don't hide it again." For a moment she couldn't speak. Her throat tightened with emotion. I'd love that," she finally said, her voice trembling. He smiled, patting her shoulder. "Good. Then it's settled. Now go home, superstar. You've earned it." When Emma stepped outside, the night was cool and clear. The streetlights glowed softly, and the faint sound of the city hummed in the distance. She walked slowly, replaying everything in her mind. The laughter, the fear, the music, the applause. It all felt unreal, like a dream she had stepped into by accident. As she reached her apartment, she paused at the door and looked up at the sky. It was sprinkled with stars, each one shining quietly, confidently, just like she felt now. She smiled to herself, whispering, "Dad, I did it." Inside, she sat down at her keyboard again. But this time, she didn't play to practice. She played to remember, to hold on to the feeling of the cafe, the faces that had listened, the energy that had filled the room. Her fingers moved freely, no longer afraid of mistakes, no longer weighed down by the past. She played until tears rolled down her cheeks, not from sadness, but from joy. Because for the first time in years, Emma wasn't just surviving, she was living. And as the soft melody drifted through her apartment, she realized something powerful. The laughter that once hurt her had become the spark that reignited her dream. She didn't just touch the piano that night, she touched hearts. And in doing so, she found her own again. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the cafe windows, painting everything in a warm golden glow. The table still carried the faint scent of coffee and laughter from the night before. Emma arrived early, as always, but this time her steps felt different, lighter, almost floating. She had barely slept. Her mind had replayed every sound, every face, every heartbeat from her performance. It still didn't feel real. As she tied her apron and began arranging the tables, she noticed something unusual. A small crowd of people had already gathered outside before opening time, smiling, chatting, peeking through the glass. When she unlocked the door, a few of them stepped inside eagerly. "Are you the pianist from last night?" one woman asked. Emma froze, half surprised, half embarrassed. Yes, I suppose that was me." The woman's eyes sparkled. "Your performance was beautiful. My daughter couldn't stop talking about it. She said she wants to learn piano now." Emma smiled, touched. "That's wonderful. Tell her to never stop playing." More people came in, ordering coffee, asking if she would play again. One man even held up his phone and showed her a short video. "Look," he said proudly, "you're all over social media. Everyone's talking about the waitress who played like a star." Emma's cheeks turned pink. She didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to attention, especially not like this, but she couldn't help feeling a quiet happiness bloom inside her chest. When Mr. Cooper walked in, he was holding a newspaper and grinning from ear to ear. "Would you look at this?" he said, showing her a small article with a blurry picture of her at the piano. The headline read, "Local waitress stuns cafe crowd with emotional piano performance." Emma laughed softly, shaking her head. "Oh no," she said shyly. "I look terrified in that photo." "You look like someone doing what they were born to do," he replied warmly. "I told you, we're making this a regular thing. Every Friday you play. People are already calling for reservations." She blinked, hardly believing her ears. "Really?" "Really," he said, smiling. "You've turned this little cafe into something special." The rest of the day passed in a blur of cheerful customers and familiar smiles. Even Tom was different now, quieter, more respectful. When he handed her a tray, he said with a grin, "I guess I'll stick to serving drinks and leave the art to you." Emma laughed. "Deal." That evening, when her shift ended, she sat alone at the piano again. The cafe was quiet, bathed in soft golden light from the lamps. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, still feeling the warmth of last night's applause lingering in the air. But this time, she didn't play for an audience. She played for herself, slow, peaceful notes that filled the space with calm and gratitude. As the melody drifted, she thought of her journey, of all the days she'd felt invisible, all the times people had laughed or looked past her. She realized now that none of it was wasted. Every hard day, every quiet tear, every moment of doubt had led her here. Sometimes the world needs to laugh at you before it can see you. She finished the song and sat for a moment, eyes closed, breathing in the stillness. For the first time in her life, Emma didn't feel small. She didn't feel ordinary. She felt whole. When she walked home that night, the streetlights shimmered on the wet pavement and the air was cool and gentle. Her reflection followed her in the shop windows, not the shy, tired waitress she once was, but a woman who had found her courage again. At her apartment, she placed her apron on the chair and sat at her old keyboard. She smiled as she touched the keys, whispering softly, "Thank you, Dee." The sound that followed was sweet and free, a melody of peace, of gratitude, of love. She didn't need a stage, or a spotlight, or applause. She had found something greater, the power to share her heart. And so, every Friday night, the cafe filled with the same magic. People came not just for coffee, but to feel something, to listen to the girl who once was laughed at and now made the whole room fall silent with a single note. Emma had not just played the piano that night. She had played her way back to herself. And in that small cafe, under the soft glow of the lights, her dream finally came true. Not as a fairy tale ending, but as a quiet truth. Sometimes, the people who seem invisible are the ones carrying the brightest songs. All they need is the courage to play them.